Now remember, if you're nervous about any of the things that I'm telling you here, there's no shame in bringing your guitar to a qualified tech so that you can focus on what's important. Frank Falbo here for Fishman. Today we're going to install a set of the Fluence Koch Gristle-Tone pickups. And as you can see here, I've got a nice American Telecaster. It's got some vintage pickups in it, and I'm going to take you through the install. It's a fairly simple install, but maybe I'll be able to give you some tips and tricks to make your life a little bit easier when you install yours. Let's get to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off all the parts, and on a Telecaster you've got to pretty much remove the bridge to get to the bridge pickup cavity. You're going to take the pick guard off to get to the neck pickup underneath. So let's have at it. Now sometimes the screws to take the bridge off are kind of hidden underneath the saddles, depending on where the saddles are located to be intonated on the guitar. So we are going to loosen up these screws to push the saddles forward so that we can get at the bridge saddles. If you're nervous about going back to your intonation point, then just mark off where they were. In our case, we'll just intonate it again once it's been put back together and restrung. So the first thing we're going to do to get all this stuff out of here is unsolder the pickups from the switch over here inside the harness, and then we'll unsolder, the output jack. Now, usually when I'm working on somebody else's guitar, I like to throw a cloth or a t-shirt or something like that down so that you don't risk getting any solder or anything else scratching the guitar. So sometimes the output jack areas can be a little bit tricky on a Telecaster because they have this cup, and then behind the cup there's a little thing that kind of pinches into the wood of the guitar to hold everything in place. It is recessed kind of deep, so you do need to get like some kind of socket wrench that goes in deep. That way you're not reaching in there with some needle nose pliers or anything like that. But as long as you do that, you're in good shape. Now in our case, once the output jack was out, it's pretty easy to just pop this thing out. Sometimes it can be more difficult if there's more paint in there, or if it got stuck, or if somebody, glued it in there or something. So be careful when you take it out, but usually it'll just pop right free. And then you can see this little guy inside here where that's been pinched into the wood, which is what kind of holds everything together. We're going to take that out because the Fluence set replaces the entire output jack area with the 1/4-inch plug and the little mini USB to charge the battery. Now, sometimes these things can be wedged in there pretty tight, so you want to be kind of careful when you need to go ahead and pull it out of the wood. So now that everything's been desoldered, I'm going to remove the pickups, and they'll just slide right out. And one of the things I like to do is when the pickup is almost ready to come out, I move away from the guitar, just in case anything drops or springs away or falls or anything like that. Normally on Fender-style instruments, there'll be some surgical tubing in there to act as a spring. A lot of times, it's been compressed to wherever the old pickup was, so I like to also get rid of that. And when you get your set of Fluence pickups, they're going to have some new tubing in there for you to use. Fishman also gives you a fresh set of 3 screws to use for the Tele bridge pickup. However, in this case, all the screws on this guitar have vintage style slot heads, and so I'm going to go ahead and use the existing screws that came on the instrument. Now here's where we get to something interesting, which is that a lot of times Telecasters will either have a bridge ground wire coming up to the bridge area and touching the bridge. Maybe they'll have a bridge ground wire coming up and getting squeezed with an eyelet between the screw and the base plate. But we've got a conductive base plate on our pickup, and what a lot of people will do with that is they will just allow that to be the ground connection for the bridge. And this Telecaster didn't have any additional bridge ground wires. That's how they were doing it as well, so we'll continue to do it that way. Now at this point, because the bridge pickup has a channel that goes right to the control cavity that's independent of the one from the neck pickup, we can go ahead and put the bridge right back on so nothing's flopping around or scratching anything, and we'll work on the next pickup next. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you go to mount the neck pickup, you're gonna find that either your neck pickup is mounted to the pick guard or it's mounted directly to the wood. And over the years, even Fender has changed the way they do it. Sometimes on an American guitar, they'll have it on the pick guard. Sometimes on, vintage-friendly guitars, they'll keep it mounted to the wood. So throughout this time, there's a wide install base of both methods. And so what Fishman did was they went ahead, first of all, they supply you with both screws, but they went ahead and threaded the base plate so that if you are going to use the pickguard mount, of course they give you screws to use that thread in there. And so if you are going to use the pickguard mount, then you would just use these screws. These are machine screws that you would put on there. If you're going to go into the wood, they give you a wood screw, but because those pickguard mount screws are a certain size, they're not big like a Strat pickup, basically you have a dimensional issue. In other words, you can't make the hole big enough for the wood screws to get in there and still small enough to catch the threads if it's a pickguard mount. So in our case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna drill out those threads so that we can drop this number 3 screw down in there. Once again, Fishman gives you the screw to use, but in this case, it just so happens that the screws that came in the guitar are the flathead screws. And so again, I'm gonna keep it kind of vintage, but even when I can, I like to use the existing screws on the guitar for something like this, because those screws have gone into the wood and they've made their own thread into the wood. And if you look, these screws, they just have a slightly different thread pitch than the ones that you're gonna get from Fishman. So in this case, we're gonna use the screws that came with the guitar. Now, I don't have to tell you that you wanna be kind of careful when you're going to put a drill bit right through the mounting tabs, of the pickup. But the metal is soft enough that the drill bit should kind of want to go through. Now I'm using a 7/64 inch drill bit for this task. That seems to be the right size to let these screws slip through. These are number 3 screws. Some guitars are using a number 4 screw. They're using a thicker one, so you might have to go up 1 drill bit size. But here we go. And there you have it. We're gonna clean off any little shards of metal on there, but now you'll see that those old screws slip right through. Okay, now that both screws are through the holes and my surgical tubing is on there, now it's time to drop the pickup into place. On this Telecaster, we thread it through here. Sometimes Telecasters have a bigger cavity here, or they don't have this little slot or whatever. But basically just thread the wire through until it comes out the other side. Now, one thing to consider is when we do use these vintage slot head screws, it's very easy to slip off of the screw and onto the paint job. So we want to be very careful. One of my tricks is to kind of hold the screwdriver in place and let it spin. Okay, next up is the output jack. Remember, we took the old one out. We're going to put the new one in. In this guitar, it fits pretty well. It goes right in, kind of, fits loosely. If you go to put yours in and it turns out that there was a bunch of extra polyurethane paint that's built up or dripped around in there or something. You can clean that away, with a Dremel, but I think you'll find that in most cases, we're just a little bit undersized and it should slip in to any domestic import, nitrocellulose lacquer, thick poly, whatever, it should go right in. Now, you get to decide whether or not you want the output jack on the top and the mini USB down on the bottom, or vice versa, the output jack on the bottom, mini USB on top. That's how I like it, and if I set the guitar down, the USB is coming in over the top of it. So that's how we're going to set it up over here. But let's get in tight. We have to pilot these holes when you go in. These are screw holes that are going to go in on an angle. And they're very small, you could just drive them right in, but it is my recommendation to go ahead and pilot them. And so that means you're going to get it really close to being in place, you're going to hold it firmly in place, and then you're going to come in with a pilot that goes in the direction of the hole itself. And now the screw should go right in. Now that the output jack is in place, we have this little plug assembly that just literally plugs right in to the board. So there's no soldering to do over there. But because of that, we're going to do that after we go ahead and solder the pickup wires in. So let's take a look at that. You've got the bridge pickup lead and the neck pickup lead. And on those, there is a hot and a ground. It's already pre-stripped and pre-tinned for you. And so you're just going to bring them up to the solder pads that are on the board and solder them right in. You can look, they're labeled, right? So there's a G for the first one, that's ground. If you wanted to use the supplied bridge ground wire and go ahead and run another separate bridge ground wire up to the bridge to crimp it in there, you can. Next up is another G, that would be for the ground wire of the bridge pickup, because underneath that is BR in, bridge in. Underneath that is the ground for the neck pickup, and then you've got NE in, or neck pickup in. So we're gonna go ahead and solder those into place right now. And we've got our cloth to protect the guitar's finish. So I'm gonna pre-feed these wires into the holes and get them sitting there, and then I'm gonna come in and solder them in place. Now, while I'm doing this, I'll explain leaded versus unleaded solder for you guys that are interested. I'm using leaded solder. That's the traditional solder that we've always used. There's leaded and unleaded. In some countries, you can't even use solder that has lead in it. But I like to use it because it's a better joint and it kind of just makes everything flow nicer. The countries that tell you that you cannot use the leaded solder, the reason they say that is because they have laws that say we don't want to have something thrown in the garbage that has lead in it. And so I understand that. And so what I wanted to share with you guys is that if you are using an unleaded solder, then an unleaded solder likes a higher iron temperature, and you don't want to get on it and stay on it for a while and then reheat it and reheat it and reheat it again. You kind of want to just get on and off with that unleaded solder. Just get on and off and don't really let it flow more than once or twice, because it can get kind of crystalline on you and change its composure, and we don't want to do that. And the final step is to just plug in the connector that came in from the output jack. Now, this is keyed so that you can't really plug it in the wrong way. There's these two little lines in there that make sure that the only way you can plug it in is the right way. So we're going to push it in all the way, make sure it's kind of clicked into place, and you are all wired up. And the next step is to start transferring over your knobs. So we're going to take the switch tip off. It's an American size switch that we have on there. So your switch tip should fit right on there. And then these are a traditional solid shaft potentiometer. And again, that's what's common on most Telecasters out there. And so your knobs, as were in the case with this guy's guitar, your knobs, you know, the old one had the solid shaft, these have solid shaft. The knobs have a set screw on them that locks them into place. I like to lift it up just a tiny bit so that I know that after I've tightened it, it's not going to scrape against the surface of the metal. And it's just gonna flow smoothly. So at this point, you are ready to string this guitar up and plug it in. I'm gonna wait to put the pick guard back on because I wanna string it up first, then set the neck pickup height, because remember, it doesn't go through this pick guard. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put the pick guard back on when I'm done. Now that we've got the guitar strung up and the pickups are installed, it's time to set the pickup height. So everyone has their own personal preferences as to how close to the strings or how far from the strings they want to set the pickup height. For me, I like to press down at the very last fret, since that's basically as low as the string is going to ever get. And then I adjust the pickup height so that it's pretty close to the string. You know, within, some people would say a guitar pick, some people like to say a penny or a nickel or something along those lines. But I like it pretty close. And I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna set it kind of where I would like it. Like I said, pretty close. There are some pickups out there where the magnetic circuit is really strong. The magnetic field, right? The magnets, excuse me, are very strong. And so if you get the pickup very close to the string, it can kind of choke out the sustain or introduce some ghost notes as it's pulling the string sort of out of round. In this case, in Fluence's case, it's really not going to be a problem. It's usually never a problem near the bridge anyway because the string doesn't vibrate as much. So again, I'm going to bring them up kind of high. And now finally we're at the point where we can put the pick guard back on. Because remember, the pickup didn't attach to the pick guard, it attached to the guitar. So we're gonna slide it in. On a Telecaster, it's easy, it kind of just goes underneath the string. So like I said, we can do this after the strings are in place. Sometimes, where the control cavity comes into contact with the pick guard, it can be a little bit wonky, like sometimes they don't want to fit. So every once and again, you loosen the control cavity just a little bit so that it can wiggle around a little bit, and you just kind of work everything together to go into place. And that's how we had to do it on this one.